improving HR decision-making, resourcing. How we perceive. People who trust their instincts and assumptions do so because they have never questioned them. There is no good substitute for direct observation, but if we allowed everything around us to pour through our senses, we would quickly experience an overload for our limited brains to process. That is why we tend to observe by scanning, intuitively caring more in our environment for what has changed than has stayed the same. That is why many people are highly conservative. Change seems to represent more of a threat than the established order. Of course, as Darwin made clear, life is a continuous struggle to adapt, and creatures that fail to adapt become extinct. Our assumptions also dominate our thinking, and these are reinforced by cultural norms. How many people have seriously questioned, for instance, why we cook food? Most of us could name a few reasons, such as breaking foods down into a digestible form, but then why cook carrots and celery or even lettuce? The reason, of course, is that some foods need to be cooked to make them edible or to help preserve them. Spices were introduced into food not to make them more tasty, but to hide the bad taste of rotting meat in ancient times. The underlying justification for why raw food is not eaten in some countries is largely due to infected water supplies, so that the washing of a vegetable can still present a risk to the person eating it. If the water used to wash the vegetables was first boiled, then that risk would be largely removed, and the energy saved in the cooking process would help reduce cost burdens for the poor. Yet people cling strongly to their assumptions about food, and their bodies eventually adapt to their unnecessary eating habits. In the human resources function, one of the biggest areas where shortcuts to perception, instincts and assumptions still dominate thinking is in recruitment. This is a core activity of HR and has generally been delegated to HR departments because line managers do not have the time to draw up career adverts, sort through responses and organise interviews. But HR does not just undertake the administration for making appointments. It also has expertise in such things as candidate shortlisting, the statutory framework within which interviews must take place, terms and conditions of employment, competitive pay rates, and the assessment of shortlisted candidates. But let us step back for a moment. We've already made an assumption that recruitment takes a certain form. Indeed, in around 95% of corporations, the process of recruitment involves the mountainous task of advertising a job, sorting through piles of applications to produce a shortlist, and then interviewing the chosen few who have made it that far, then freewheeling through procedures until something goes wrong. But such an approach is only one of many ways that people can be found to fill jobs. Indeed, the longer the period a country's laws allow for dismissal without penalty, the more scope there is to utilise alternative methods. Types of recruitment. In traditional societies, the learning of many skills was associated with apprenticeship or articles. This was also something that either the apprentice themselves or their parents paid the master to undertake, like tuition fees at a university. Jobs were also commonly offered to friends and family or close contacts. Up until recently in the UK brick industry, recruitment was largely achieved by existing employees recommending candidates, whilst up until the 1970s, sectors such as the docks and newspaper printing operated pre-entry closed shops, meaning that recruitment was limited to candidates the trade union approved in advance. Today, it is common practice for new graduates to secure internships. These are generally low-paid positions that give the individual the opportunity to experience the world of work, and an employer the chance to decide if the intern is prospective employment material. No surprises there then. These variants of the standard corporate recruitment process have either fallen from use or in no way threaten the core assumptions. But why take such a time-consuming and inefficient approach to filling jobs when in most countries there is a facility to hire new employees on a probationary basis? Companies all too often have no system in place to properly evaluate new recruits undergoing a period of probation. That is perhaps why so much time, effort and cost is put into refining the selection process. But it is also obvious that for the same effort, a much better evaluation of job candidates can be achieved. What a new employee will be paid for in a job is generally either preset, as in public sector salary scales or a collectively agreed wage rate, or described as negotiable. In reality, the scope for negotiation will be limited by previous appointments, internal pay relativities, and the ability to pay. Now let us consider a radically different approach which properly takes into account that the recruitment is a two-way process, and that, as a founder of scientific management, Frederick Taylor, once pointed out, puts both parties centre stage instead of everything being at the behest and initiative of the employer. According to Taylor, everyone knows what they are worth. Of course, a lot of changes have taken place in the work environment since Taylor wrote about two-tier piecework systems in the 1890s, but the essence of what he perceived still holds true. If the labour market is a true market, then it should work on the principle of supply and demand to determine labour pricing. For more unique and or esoteric positions, there may also be factors at work determining the rate for the job. The most important thing that we should note is that the labour market is a universal phenomenon, not just restricted to what we once called blue-collar and lower white-collar jobs. So the most obvious form of recruitment in a fully functional labour market is the job auction. The job auction. At this point, it is appropriate to introduce another fallacy, the naturalistic fallacy, the error of turning an is into an ought. Many share the belief that because something exists, it should exist. The fact of existence itself is given a moral force. Such a fallacy underpins much conservatism and whole academic disciplines such as sociology, where the social construction of reality is allowed to grant people justification for turning norms into obligations. But as we have argued elsewhere, because most people do something gives it no moral supremacy. Neither is it necessarily wise, as any surviving lemming who is too late to see his fellow rodents jump over a cliff can tell you. There are many people who would, of course, flinch at the idea of jobs being treated like goods on sale at eBay or Alibaba. However, the job auction would need to take on a different form. To start with, the bidding process is the reverse of that for goods, as the attractiveness of some will, theoretically at least, go up the lower they bid for the job and associated benefits package on offer. There are also matters like agreed wage rates and statutory minimum wages that set an effective baseline for any bids. Many employers would also claim that the true value of a prospective employee is closely associated with their belief in a high value for their services. But the job auction approach has the virtue that it requires a clear job specification from the employer, that it matches jobs to people and sets rates on the basis of supply and demand. So any modification of the pure labour market approach would need to be clearly justified. It is important that there is no prescribed format for a job bid. This is down to the skills and professionalism of the bidder. The only requirement is that the bidder states the salary and any other essential terms and conditions they would be prepared to work for. It is no distortion of the market principle to require candidates to match themselves against specified job requirements, particularly in respect to qualifications and experience. Likewise, there is every good reason to set and declare a minimum pay rate for the job, specifying perhaps when it would be subject to review, for instance, upon completion of the probationary period. Moreover, to discourage over-wordy responses, it should be specified that the written bid, including capability statements, should not exceed one side of A4. Finally, there is no substitute for the job interview. Shortlisting will be much easier than with conventional recruitment procedures, and sampling could, for instance, be based on the cheapest credible bidder, those offering their services at the known rate for the job, and one of the highest bids. The interview. The purpose of a job interview is twofold. It is one of the ways that what a person claims as their qualifications and experience can be verified. It is common for candidates, for instance, to lie or elaborate these facts. Now is the time to discover if they can convince the interviewers what they claim is true. The second reason for an interview is to determine if the person's manner and personality and values fit the organisation and team with whom they will work. There is no point in having a diffident individual if the team is energetic and candid in their interactions. Where interview panels go wrong is where they see their job is to assess qualifications and experience from scratch and to cover non-relevant or private aspects of a candidate's life. They also tend to overrate people they like and get on with rather than see as talented and right for the job. A panel cannot assess the fit question unless a member of the prospective department or work team is on the panel and both the doubts about the qualifications and experience and issue of fit have been discussed before the interviews begin. Structured interviews in which all the same questions are asked for each candidate are not effective, as they do not achieve the objectives of the interview. Different concerns about each candidate merit different questions. Another common mistake is for panel members to voice their views by saying, on the one hand and on the other hand. If there are doubts that can be substantiated and are significant, then a candidate should be set aside. A balance of positives and negatives is not the basis for selection of any job candidate. This example illustrates that HR decisions are constantly being made at every stage of the recruitment process. What we have done is streamline the decision process without removing the need to make finely balanced judgments. The telephone test. In addition to the job interview, a simple additional test for job suitability is the telephone test. A high proportion of jobs require employees to make and receive telephone calls, but how well can they handle difficult calls? To evaluate how well a candidate can hold up under pressure, a member of the interview panel will leave the room and pose as a complainant. It is surprising how even the most confident interviewee can perform badly even when doing role play. The precise situation will depend on the nature of the job. If the job is commercial, then the call could be the handling of a customer complaint. If the job is in production, then it could be a call from the QC manager. The written test. Another extremely simple but revealing assessment is the unstructured written test. The candidate is simply asked to describe in 15 minutes 3 things they did in the last week and explain their actions in each case. Candidates that simply write, on Tuesday afternoon I went to the cinema and watched a romantic comedy, are doing two things. Firstly, they are taking actions to mean special actions rather than everyday actions. Secondly, they are describing the action in a mundane and purely factual way. Responses with too much detail indicate a possibly obsessive personality. Too little detail indicates someone who lacks perception and imagination. The choice of actions for the explanation will also be revealing, as too will be the use of logic, evidence, and proportionality in making the explanation. The written test will also show their ability to communicate, put ideas together, and spell and apply grammar without the aid of external assistance. So the job applicant has responded to an invitation to bid for a job. They have been chosen on the basis of the bid and given a streamlined interview and 2 of the spot tests. The day pass. If the interview panel has made a clear selection and the written telephone tests have proven to be positive, then the final step is to offer the chosen person an opportunity to work in their new department for a day. I cannot understand why this step is not taken as a matter of course. The person's new colleagues need to meet them, and the person about to commit to a new job needs to check it out before giving their notice. It is extremely revealing what a person does on this day. The company should not structure it too much following the initial introductions. The person who tidies their desk and does little is probably not going to be very productive. Likewise, the endlessly talkative type is either too nervous or has an irritating, distractive personality. The ideal outcome for the day is that the recruit finds something productive to do in it. This could, for instance, be profiling potential customers, learning about office procedures, or setting up technical equipment. If it is clear at this stage that the recruit may not be suitable, then, following the precautionary principle, their appointment should not be confirmed and an explanation given to them. In most countries, there will be little risk of unfair dismissal at this stage, but a significant risk of being accused of discrimination if the recruit is from a minority group or is a woman. It is therefore very important that nothing is said or done to inflame the situation or give cause for such a claim. 2 final common pitfalls. Informing the successful bidder. At the post-interview stage, many companies pause to make consultations with line management and then go on to issue a formal job offer in writing. Nonsense. The candidate is either present or making their way home. Perhaps they have misgivings or alternative offers to consider. For this reason, the successful candidate should be given a call on their mobile to tell them the outcome and determine their response. Such a speedy approach is usually also justified because if the first choice refuses the offer, the second choice can be called. But unless there is a tight contest for the first choice of person for the job, then the second choice is precisely that. Why take the second best? So the purpose of the call is just to determine if the candidate should be invited to the job sampling day. References. The convention of requesting at least 2 written references, 1 professional and 1 personal, is, and we all know it, a pointless exercise. This is more of a ritual than any substantive use. Its main purpose is as a defence against potential future problems if the job holder is found to have truly fabricated credentials or has a bad work record. Telephone calls to referees are more often revealing, but a manager who is relieved to see an employee go elsewhere is not going to provide a true picture of their capabilities. It is now common practice for large employers to decline a full reference and only confirm the name of the last job held and how long the employee had been employed. This information is all that a prospective employer should therefore request. Although a precise start date would be helpful to check against the bid. The job contract. More important than the job offer letter is the employment contract. Commonly, job contracts are drawn up as a template by a lawyer or internal counsel and then reused for each new appointment. But what about job differences and the passage of time? Every new appointment is a good opportunity to look at the standard terms being offered and to ask if there are any gaps in the text. For instance, is there a clause which states that if any of the clauses of the contract become invalid, then only those specific clauses will cease to apply and the rest of the contract will remain applicable? What happens if an employee takes their annual holiday during a sickness absence period? Will they be entitled both to holiday pay and sick pay? The quickest and most economical way to discover what statutory rights and obligations exist in any jurisdiction is to go online and look at the FEDE knowledge base, or give the FEDE helpline a call. For membership details, visit fede.com. The probationary period. This period will generally run for 2 weeks to 6 months according to legislative limitations. The period should be carefully planned to provide a full induction program and ensure the person is fully operational at the earliest opportunity. If they require special training, this should happen during their probation. It is wise to have 2 assessments during this period. The first to gain initial feedback from the new employee and to trigger alarm signals if the person does not appear to be suitable. The second assessment should be conducted in good time so that the due notice period will not run into the protected period if a decision is made to terminate the employee.